Hello, my name is Martin Raschke from Hornberg Research. I worked together with Mick Baumeister on the development of the hb1 MIDI breath station, and I would like to show you the technical aspects of the hb1. Mick will then show you how the musical functions work. I will now show you the parameters of the hb1, the technical possibilities offered by the hb1, how is the hb1 connected up, and everything one can do with the hb1. The hb1 is made up from two components. One is the controller unit with an LED display, input key, and the rotary encoder. Different parameters can be chosen with the input key, and their different values can be changed by turning the rotary encoder. On the back of the hb1 there are connecting sockets for USB, MIDI, and the sensor. The current is provided over the USB socket. It is also possible to connect the hb1 MIDI breath station with a MIDI keyboard, as well as setting it up with a computer from which it can also be controlled. The second component is the sensor unit, which I have already hung around my neck, which is connected here. The sensor unit is made out of wood and stainless steel, as are all the other components of the hb1 MIDI breath station, including the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece has a valve here, which, according to requirement, can be opened or closed so that the required airflow can be measured by the sensor unit and passed on to the controller unit. Yes, nothing happens without electricity. Now we must provide the controller unit with electricity. This comes over the USB socket, or either from the computer or the delivered USB power supply unit, or any other USB power supply unit. The hb1 immediately shows the output values. One sees immediately that when I blow into the mouthpiece, the corresponding value is shown. That is the direct value which will be transmitted when the MIDI is connected to a computer or other MIDI equipment. Now I have closed the valve, but when one opens it a little, so that is only one of the possibilities which in principle are offered by every other breath controller. So how is the hb1 MIDI breath station different? We have created an entire series of additional parameters which are unavailable in normal breath controllers, and which makes it easier for the musician to achieve their wishes with the breath controller. So let me take you through the parameters bit by bit and describe their technical meaning. Then, as I said, Mick will take over and describe the musical aspects of the hb1 MIDI breath station. First there is the drive, which provides the sensitivity. So how hard must I blow into the mouthpiece so that I get the end value? One sees in a moment it is on 1, that is the lowest value. One really has to blow. Now I'll choose a higher value. The scale goes to 10. Let's simply take 10. 10 is the most sensitive value, and here I can, as one sees, just speaking is enough, with hardly any pressure. I've already reached the end value. The mouthpiece, together with the valve, enables one to find the right adjustment so that it is pleasant to use. I now set the drive a little back to a medium value of 2 or 3, so. The next parameter is the offset. This parameter is also available on other breath controllers. I can set the base value with the offset, from which can be created the other output values. For example, now I simply set the value on 10, so from here everything goes from the value 10. The 10 is the base value, and by blowing in I can now again get 127. As soon as I use the offset, I can also suck in the air. Now it's possible for me, by sucking in the air, to change the values from 10 to 0. I now turn off the offset. The next parameter is the attack. We have created the attack because sometimes it is difficult simply by blowing to achieve either the required value or to maintain a constant value. Consequently, there is the possibility that one can set a delay for the output value. I set the attack value to the highest level that is available. Then you can see how well it functions. Again, without the attack. One can see that I can very quickly reach 127 when I correspondingly strongly blow. Now I choose the attack for the highest value, which is 40, and you can see very well how the end value is reached only slowly. This is the effect of the attack parameter, for which one can set the parameter in 40 steps. So here one can very nicely also modulate and adapt to the requirements of the different instruments. In addition to the attack parameter, there is also a new extension parameter, which is the boost attack. Often within the normal range of the attack, one simply wants a conscious delay on the input signal. But sometimes one wants to reach the highest value very quickly. This can be achieved with the boost attack. We now have 5 levels which can be set up. I select the highest value again, the 5, which I can now reach when I blow very strongly. The attack is, as it were, switched off, and I can immediately achieve the required end value. I'll demonstrate this again. Yes, here you can see it really well how before it reached the 127 value slowly. Now I can reach 127 by blowing immediately very strongly. Let us turn now to the next parameter. I cancel the attack parameter and go now to the release. The release parameter is very similar to the attack parameter. Here the time delay is also adjustable, in this case for a lower value. So when I do not blow, the release always works. I'll show you an example. I'll set it again to the maximum value. Again, there are 40 levels, or steps. I blow now to a value of 127, and you can see how it very nicely affects the delay of the outgoing signal. Now the value continues with this release time to the end value, which is 0. The shorter the release that is chosen, then the faster it goes. I have chosen now the maximum value. Here there is also a boost parameter called the boost release, which in principle works identically as the boost attack. When I now give it a boost value of 5, in this case I can again suck in the air and reach the end value very quickly. So now I blow hard, again up to 127. Now it runs down, and by sucking in the air I'm immediately at the wished for end value. I have here so many possibilities, really, to prepare the MIDI signal so that it corresponds to the instruments I'm using, and so that I can realize my needs in a musical way. So now there are a few other parameters. Now we come to another possibility, which is to define the upper limit of the output signal. That is our limit parameter. The limit is set on 127, which means I can now create values to 127, so up to the normal end value of 127. If I now change the limit value, for example to 100, then I can create values up to 100. You can see it really well. Here the release parameter is still working, which I'll now remove. We don't need it now. Again to the limit. Here 100 is now the end. Now it goes only as far as 100. This is sometimes sensible when it's not possible to set a limit within the sequences. I can finish it with the hb1 MIDI breath station. Now I want to tell you about another unique characteristic of the hb1 MIDI breath station, which is the inversion of the output signal. In addition, it is possible, I'll set it to a high limit again. In addition, the drive parameter can be pushed in the negative direction, so that the created output signal is simply reversed. One can see it already now. Instead of the 0, there is now the 127. Now when I blow, then this value will become decreased rather than increase. That can be very helpful, for example, when manipulating the volume, or when one wants a signal to be faded out. A further possibility occurs naturally when the drive parameter is given the value of 0, so that the hb1 MIDI breath station is simply switched off and it will not generate any further signal. This is a kind of mute function. I want to briefly talk about the 3 MIDI-related parameters, now that I have described the musically relevant parameters of the hb1 MIDI breath station. The first is the data reduction of the hb1. The data reduction makes it possible to reduce the outgoing data stream so that only the necessary data will be transmitted. This is especially advantageous when the MIDI bus is already heavily loaded. Let me show you a short example. You can already see it on the display. At the moment we have not turned on the data reduction. I now blow to my limit value of 100. One can see very nicely how the data is continually going out until it reaches the 100. With the data reduction, I can ensure that essentially less data is created. I think one can see roughly that here now clearly less data is created. What at last? The signal or the result is not negatively affected because the data is reduced so that only the actually relevant data for the system on the bus will be transmitted and all other will be repressed. Further MIDI parameters are already known controller. Here I can set the employed MIDI continuous controller between 0 and 127. Here one can naturally choose any MIDI controller number. Insofar as the actual system is the correct one, depends on the respective settings. But one is here free and can really adjust every controller number which is possible. The other is naturally the MIDI channel. As we know, the values from 1 to 16. And now you can select the hb1 MIDI transmit channel. Now that I have described all the relevant musical parameters of the hb1 MIDI breath station, just a few words about the operating concept. All the setups which can be selected on this apparatus can be saved, up to 25 programs. I simply choose the program I want and recall the appropriate settings from the machine. Saving the parameters is just easy. In my presentation, one saw that it is not so simple. Then by pressing that key, choose the respective parameters. That's why we have created the possibility of distributing the parameters between button 1 and button 2 of the rotary encoder. I'll press on the rotary encoder because it's also a button. So, in a moment, it indicates that there are no parameters available. I can now transfer the parameter from the pull list, which is programmed to key 1, to the rotary encoder button 2. I simply select the relevant parameter. Let's select the limit so. Now it has moved to the button of the rotary encoder, and consequently it is available here. One can do that with all the parameters which are available. Take, for example, again the MIDI parameter, or, for example, the data reduction, then the continuous controller and the MIDI channel. Now I have the MIDI relevant parameters and the limit available on the right-hand side. Channel, limit, reduction, continuous controller, and on the left side are the rest of the parameters. So everyone can now put the system together so that the relevant parameters are easily accessible for them. A further possibility to quickly arrive at a parameter is to press the key and, while keeping it depressed and by turning the rotary encoder, select the parameters one wants. So, for example, I can choose a parameter very quickly in which I'm interested. Yes, that was it for the operation. Now a few words about further characteristics which the hb1 MIDI breath station possesses. We have built in a MIDI merger. It is possible to send MIDI signals from any keyboard to the hb1 MIDI in. And the output signal is the merged data of the keyboard and breath controller data. Naturally, one can also send the hb1 breath controller data on its own MIDI channel. A further possibility is that the inbuilt MIDI interface enables one to send data from the computer to the additional MIDI output of the hb1 MIDI breath station, which can also be used as a MIDI interface to send data to another MIDI device. So now I think that I have described the important aspects of the hb1 MIDI breath station, and that it is clear how it differs from a normal breath controller. It is simply the numerous possibilities, the greater flexibility, the possibility at any time, whether in the studio or on stage, to use the hb1 MIDI breath station with or without a computer or simply MIDI equipment. It is very and consistently reliable. It creates only the data that is actually necessary. And our belief is that one can configure it to fulfill the musical needs of every musician. Mick will be putting several videos on the web which show the hb1 MIDI breath station in action with its musical aspects. In particular, he will show aspects such as how to set up the hb1 for particular requirements, for realizing special requirements, and which parameters to use. I think that that is enough from me for the first time, and I thank you all for your attention. See you soon.